In the 1980s, a group of children built a brand new language from nothing, and no adult taught them a single word of it. Some adults actually tried to stop them, and the language worked anyway. Nicaraguan Sign Language is the only language spontaneously created, without the influence of other languages, to have been recorded from its birth. Linguists were watching in real time. A rich, varied, newly constructed language made of signs was just then being born in the minds, hands, and faces of children, and researchers were stunned to discover they were present at the birth of a new language. That's not a metaphor. That actually happened. And what it tells us about how all human language started, including yours, is going to completely change how you think about the question we're here to answer. How do humans communicate before speech? Most people assume the answer is grunts, then words, then sentences. Sound first, complexity second. But the evidence is pointing somewhere else entirely. And by the end of this video, you're going to see that the real answer is still happening inside your own body right now. That's the part most people never connect. We'll get there, but first, let's go back to Nicaragua. Before the late 1970s, Nicaragua had no cohesive deaf community or sign language. Most deaf people used their own set of personal signs, known only to family and friends. Then the government opened a school, and for the first time, deaf children were in the same place at the same time. Teachers initially focused on spoken Spanish and lip reading, not sign language, to little effect. But the school provided a valuable place for children to interact with one another. And on the buses, on the playgrounds, away from the classrooms, something no one planned started happening. Older and younger students began to select conventions for necessary words. A shared vocabulary, then structure, then grammar. Younger children in the school took that early system of rudimentary sign language and transformed it into a more efficient language. Even more astonishing was that they introduced new features such as verb agreement and other grammatical rules that initial students lacked, making it not just a signed version of Spanish, but its own full-fledged language. Here's the part that really matters. It wasn't the adults building the grammar. Researchers noted, we've been able to see how it is that children, not adults, generate language. It's the only time that we've seen a language being created out of thin air. The systematic structure, the rules, the sentence logic, that was being driven by the youngest kids. Children under 10, not elder hunters, not community leaders, kids. And that rewrites something important about how we think about early human language. If grammar originates in juveniles, then the real inventors of early human communication may not have been the wisest members of the group. They may have been the youngest. Now here's the thing I want you to hold on to, because we'll come back to it. If children can build a complete language from scratch using only their hands, no sound, no instruction, no template, that raises a much bigger question about what came first. Sound or gesture? Keep that in your head. Because it wasn't just Nicaragua. Emerging only in the last 70 years within a small Bedouin community with a high incidence of congenital deafness, Al Sayed Bedouin Sign Language developed spontaneously without contact with other sign systems. Two completely separate communities. Two completely separate cases. Same result. A full language built from the hands up with no spoken component driving it. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. And that pattern lines up almost perfectly with what the dominant modern theory of language origins actually says. The gestural origins theory argues that language didn't begin with the voice, it began with the hands. The reasoning goes like this. When our ancestors started walking upright, the hands became free. Not just free to carry things, but free to point, to mime, to signal. And the brain, which was already wired to read the intentions of other moving bodies, had a ready-made system to build on. Speech, under this theory, wasn't the origin. Speech was the upgrade that came later. The living proof of this shows up when you look at our closest relatives. Captive great apes are far better at learning intentional gesture-based communication systems than they are at producing speech, and their wild manual gestures are more flexible and context-independent than their vocal calls. The ape brain, in other words, seems built for sign, not sound. And if that's true for chimps, it was probably true for the hominins who came before us too. So if gesture came first, when did speech enter the picture? And who is doing it? This is where a single small bone changes everything. The hyoid is a horseshoe-shaped bone that sits at the base of your tongue. It anchors the muscles that let you control your voice, and it almost never fossilizes. So for most of human prehistory, we have no physical record of whether any of our ancestors had the anatomy to speak. The Cabra-2 Neanderthal dates from approximately 60,000 years ago and is part of a near-complete adult male skeleton unearthed in 1983. And inside that skeleton, there was a hyoid, intact, the only one of its kind in the fossil record from that period. Now, finding a bone that looks like a modern human hyoid is interesting, but it's not proof of anything on its own. Shape can be coincidental, so researchers went deeper. Their analyses demonstrated that previously observed gross similarities between the Cabra-2 hyoid and those of modern humans are not superficial. The bone not only resembled that of a modern human, but it was used in very similar ways, because the internal microarchitecture is a response to the vectors and magnitudes of the forces to which it is routinely subjected. Think about what that means. Bone remodels itself over a lifetime based on how it's used. If you use a muscle hard and repeatedly, the bone it attaches to changes internally to handle that load. Because internal architecture reflects the loadings to which a bone is routinely subjected, the findings are consistent with the capacity for speech in the Neanderthals. A 60,000-year-old bone, scanned at the microscopic level, carrying the mechanical signature of a speaking throat. That's not a theory. That's a physical record of what that body was doing while it was alive. So Neanderthals may have been able to talk, which means speech isn't even uniquely ours. And the timeline of when vocalization entered the picture gets pushed back further than most people expect. But here's where it gets really interesting, because speech having the hardware doesn't mean speech was the primary tool. There's a reason gesture may have stayed dominant even after vocal anatomy was in place. And it's a reason that makes complete sense when you think about the environment these early humans were actually living in. Imagine you're hunting, or you're moving through territory where a rival group might hear you, or a predator is close. Sound is a liability. A gesture isn't. Silent signing has a tactical advantage that speech simply doesn't have. It works in situations where making noise gets you killed. The theory here is that gesture and speech likely coexisted for a long stretch of human prehistory, with gesture serving as the danger mode and speech as the mode for safer, more settled situations. Two systems running side by side, a quiet channel and a loud one, and you'd switch depending on what the situation demanded. And there's a fascinating piece of research that backs up why gesture may have been the dominant teaching tool specifically. One study found that when you're trying to teach someone to make stone tools, which is exactly what early humans needed to pass on, gesture consistently outperformed non-gestural methods. The implication is that the pressure to communicate may not have come from warning about predators or coordinating a hunt. It may have come from teaching a craft. Someone needed to show someone else how to make a tool, and the hands are the best way to do it. Speech may have evolved later, when the technology got complex enough that gesture alone couldn't carry all the information. That's a pretty radical reframe of why language exists at all. Not warning calls, not mating signals, a workshop, an apprenticeship, someone's hands showing another pair of hands what to do. If you're finding this as wild as I did when I first went down this rabbit hole, drop a comment below. I want to know which part hit you hardest. Now, back to that open question I planted at the beginning, the one about what all of this means for you, right now, watching this video. Gesture never disappeared. The reason you wave your hands when you talk, the reason it feels slightly wrong when you try to explain something complex while sitting completely still, that's not a habit. That's architecture. Modern brain research shows that manual gesture and spoken language share overlapping neural circuitry. They're not two separate systems that happen to run at the same time. They're intertwined at the root. Observing someone gesture actually affects a person's verbal responses when specific speech-related brain regions are involved. Your hands and your words are not doing separate jobs. They're the same job, split across two outputs. The Nicaraguan children didn't invent something new. They rediscovered something ancient. When they had no spoken language available, the brain didn't go silent. It went to the hands. Because that's where it started. And even now, tens of thousands of years into the age of speech, the hands are still in the loop. Every time you reach for a gesture mid-sentence, every time you feel weirdly stuck when you can't move your hands while you talk, that's the fossil behavior. That's the original system still running underneath the one we think of as language. So here's where we actually land. Language didn't start with a voice. The best evidence says it started with a hand. Gesture came first, speech was layered on top, and the two systems have been running together ever since. We watched it happen in Nicaragua. We found a physical evidence in a 60,000-year-old throat bone. And we can feel it happening in our own bodies every time we open our mouths. The question, how did humans communicate before speech, turns out to have a cleaner answer than anyone expected. The same way those Nicaraguan kids did. With their hands, with intention, and with no instruction required. Every story has a deeper story, and at Curiologix we uncover it. Like, subscribe, and stay curious.